Let me ask you a simple question. When was the last time you looked under your kitchen sink and noticed something that had been sitting there for years? Not a new gadget, not an expensive product from the garden center, just an ordinary household item so familiar that you barely see it anymore. For many American families, that item is a small box of borax. It has been around for generations, tucked away in laundry rooms, utility closets, and kitchen cabinets, quietly waiting while newer products come and go. I remember seeing a box of it long before I understood what it was. My grandmother kept one on a shelf near the back door. My parents always had one somewhere in the house. Nobody talked about it much. It was simply there, like a hammer in the toolbox or a cast iron skillet hanging in the kitchen. It was considered useful, dependable, and worth keeping around. Looking back, what surprises me is not that they used borax. What surprises me is how many different ways they used it. Today, most gardeners can walk into a store and find an entire aisle filled with products promising to solve every problem imaginable. One bottle claims to stop insects. Another promises healthier plants. Another targets weeds, mold, mildew, or soil issues. Yet many of the people who raised gardens 50 or 60 years ago often relied on a much smaller collection of tools. They learned how to make the most of what they already had. They shared practical knowledge with neighbors, family members, and friends, and that knowledge was passed down one season at a time. Now, I am not suggesting that every old method is automatically better than every modern one. Gardening has benefited from research, science, and innovation. But sometimes useful knowledge quietly fades away, not because it stopped working, but because fewer people continue talking about it. Borax happens to be one of those forgotten items. For more than a century, gardeners, homeowners, and homesteaders found creative ways to use it around the home and garden. In today's video, I want to share 11 traditional borax uses that generations of gardeners relied on for years. Some of them are surprisingly practical. Some may save time, some may save money. And one of them, the 11th use, was something I rarely heard discussed until an older orchard grower shared it with me many years ago. That story alone is worth staying for. Before we get started, tell me down in the comments where you're gardening this year. What state are you in, and what challenge are you dealing with right now? Is it ants, slugs, weeds, mildew, or something else entirely? I always enjoy reading your comments, and more than once, a question from a viewer has inspired an entire future video. So let me know. Now, let's start with one of the oldest and most widely known uses of borax, a simple trick that many families used long before I was born. The first use is probably the one that introduced many families to borax in the first place, and it involves one of the most persistent pests a homeowner can face: ants. If you have ever walked into your kitchen and discovered a line of ants marching across the counter as if they own the place, you know how frustrating it can be. What made borax useful was not that it killed ants instantly. In fact, the opposite is true. A simple mixture of borax, sugar, and water attracts worker ants, allowing them to carry the bait back to the colony. Over time, the entire colony is affected. That approach has been used for generations because it works with the ant's behavior rather than against it. Many university extension programs have documented the effectiveness of low-dose borax baits when used correctly, which explains why this old method continues to survive decade after decade. The second use takes us out into the garden, where slugs and snails can turn a healthy bed of lettuce, strawberries, or hostas into something that looks like it survived a hailstorm. Every gardener knows the disappointment of walking outside in the morning and finding fresh holes scattered across beautiful leaves. Older gardeners often used borax as part of a barrier strategy around vulnerable plants. The goal was not to drench the garden in powder, but to create a dry zone that discouraged soft-bodied pests from crossing. Combined with proper watering practices and good garden sanitation, this approach helped many gardeners reduce damage without constantly reaching for expensive products. The third use moves indoors again and addresses a problem that usually begins outside. Fleas have a remarkable ability to travel from lawns and yards into homes on pets, shoes, and clothing. Once established, they can become difficult to eliminate because their eggs and larvae often hide deep within carpets and fabrics. For years, homeowners used borax as part of a cleaning routine designed to disrupt that life cycle. By working the powder into carpet fibers and removing it later, many families found they could reduce flea populations and prevent recurring infestations. While modern treatments are available today, it is interesting how many traditional households relied on this simple approach long before professional pest services became common. The fourth use is one that many people associate with older farmhouses and country homes. Cockroaches have always been unwelcome guests, especially in warm climates where they seem determined to survive almost anything. Traditional borax bait mixtures became popular because they could be placed in hidden locations where roaches traveled regularly. Over time, the pests encountered the powder during their normal movement and grooming habits. What fascinates me is that this method remained popular across multiple generations because it was affordable, easy to prepare, and required very little equipment. The fifth use may be the most surprising because it has nothing to do with killing pests at all. It involves feeding the soil. Many gardeners do not realize that boron is a micronutrient required by plants in extremely small amounts. Certain crops, including tomatoes, broccoli, cauliflower, beets, carrots, and fruit trees, depend on proper boron levels for healthy growth and fruit development. In some regions, soils naturally contain enough boron. In others, deficiencies can occur. Agricultural extension programs have long discussed the importance of correcting deficiencies carefully and accurately because plants need only tiny amounts. This is where older gardeners often showed remarkable discipline. They understood that more is not better. The right amount helps. Too much causes problems. That simple lesson applies to nearly every aspect of gardening. Now, those first 5 uses already show how versatile a humble box of borax can be. But the next group of uses takes us deeper into the garden itself, where some forgotten tricks may still surprise even experienced growers. And one of them helped save a neighbor's garden after he was ready to give up on an entire season. Now, let's step back outside because this is where many of the lesser-known borax uses begin to show up. These are not the kinds of tips you hear discussed very often anymore, but they were once common knowledge among gardeners, homesteaders, and people who spent most of their lives solving problems with what they already had on hand. The sixth use involves protecting wood from some of the most destructive pests a property owner can face. Carpenter ants and termites have caused headaches for generations, especially in barns, sheds, fence posts, porches, and woodpiles. I remember talking with an older neighbor years ago who had spent decades maintaining a small family property. He told me that one of the smartest habits he ever learned was treating vulnerable wood before pests had a chance to move in. Rather than waiting until damage appeared, he focused on prevention. Borax-based wood treatments became popular because the mineral could penetrate unfinished wood and remain there for long periods. As a result, many homeowners used it as an extra layer of protection in areas where moisture, insects, and aging wood often came together. The lesson was simple. Fixing a problem early is usually easier than repairing damage later. The seventh use is especially important for gardeners who feel like their season is already underway and there is no turning back. Maybe your tomatoes are growing well. Maybe your cucumbers are climbing. Maybe your squash plants look fantastic one week and disappointing the next. Then suddenly you notice a grayish-white coating spreading across the leaves. Powdery mildew is one of the most common fungal problems in home gardens, and once it appears, many gardeners assume the plant is finished. But older growers often viewed the situation differently. They understood that acting early could make a significant difference. Borax was sometimes included in homemade garden sprays designed to create less favorable conditions for fungal growth. Combined with proper spacing, better airflow, and careful watering practices, these treatments helped many gardeners extend the productive life of their plants and avoid losing an entire harvest. The eighth use is one my father talked about whenever weeds started appearing where they were not supposed to. Every property seems to have those stubborn cracks in sidewalks, driveways, stone paths, and patio edges where weeds somehow manage to survive year after year. Traditional gardeners often reserve borax for these isolated locations rather than using it broadly throughout the landscape. The goal was precision. They understood that a useful product can become harmful when used carelessly. Applied in the right place, it offered a practical solution for keeping hardscape areas cleaner and easier to maintain. The ninth use addresses a challenge familiar to anyone who owns a shed, barn, garage, chicken coop, or feed storage area. Mice may look harmless from a distance, but they can contaminate feed, damage supplies, and create ongoing frustration. Years ago, a neighbor shared a simple observation with me. He said the secret was not always eliminating every mouse. Sometimes, the secret was convincing them to go somewhere else. Traditional barriers and deterrents were often used around entry points, feed bins, and storage areas as part of a broader strategy to make a location less attractive. Older homesteaders were masters at combining several small preventative measures rather than relying on a single dramatic solution. What I find interesting about all four of these uses is that they reflect a completely different way of thinking. Instead of reacting after a problem becomes severe, previous generations often focused on prevention. They paid attention to patterns. They noticed where pests traveled, where moisture collected, where disease appeared, and where small problems could become large ones. That mindset may be even more valuable than the product itself. And speaking of forgotten knowledge, the next two uses are rarely discussed today. One deals with a problem many homeowners face every year, while the other comes from an old orchard technique that almost disappeared entirely. In fact, that final orchard story is the reason I wanted to make this video in the first place. The 10th use brings us to a problem that has frustrated homeowners for generations: mold and mildew. If you have ever owned an older home, a basement, a garden shed, or even a shaded porch, you have probably dealt with it. Those dark patches seem to appear overnight, especially in places where sunlight rarely reaches and moisture tends to linger. My grandmother used to say that mold loves neglect. The longer you ignore it, the more comfortable it becomes. What I remember most is how practical older generations were when dealing with problems like this. They did not necessarily search for the newest product on the shelf. They started with what they already understood. Borax became a popular cleaning ingredient because it could be mixed with hot water and applied to surfaces where mold and mildew were beginning to establish themselves. Combined with good ventilation and moisture control, it helped many homeowners maintain cleaner basements, storage rooms, and outdoor structures. More importantly, it reinforced a lesson that still applies today. The best way to fight mold is often to remove the conditions that allow it to thrive in the first place. But as useful as that is, it is not the story I have been waiting to tell. The 11th use is the one that caught my attention years ago when I was visiting an older orchard grower in Ohio. He was the type of man who seemed to know something about everything: fruit trees, soil management, beekeeping, pruning, weather patterns. You could spend an entire afternoon listening to him talk and still leave with questions. One autumn afternoon, we were walking through his small apple orchard. The harvest had been excellent. The trees were loaded with healthy fruit, and I noticed something unusual. Very few of the apples showed signs of insect damage. Anyone who has grown apples knows how difficult that can be. Codling moths have frustrated orchard owners for generations. Their larvae burrow into developing fruit, creating the familiar tunnels that ruin apples from the inside out. Naturally, I asked him what he was doing differently. Instead of pointing me toward an expensive product, he smiled and told me a story. His father had learned a simple orchard practice from an even older grower many decades earlier. The method involved applying a borax-based mixture to portions of the tree trunk before the growing season began. The idea was not magic. It was not a miracle cure. It was simply another example of understanding the life cycle of a pest and interrupting it at the right moment. What fascinated me was not just the technique itself. It was the way knowledge traveled from one generation to the next. A grandfather teaches a father teaches a son. A neighbor shares an idea with another neighbor. Over time, practical experience becomes tradition. Now, to be clear, modern orchard management involves many factors: proper pruning, sanitation, monitoring, healthy soil, beneficial insects, and good timing all contribute to success. No single practice solves every problem. But the story reminded me that older growers often succeeded because they paid close attention to how nature worked. They observed patterns year after year and adjusted accordingly. That lesson stayed with me long after the conversation ended. In many ways, the orchard trick is not really about borax at all. It is about observation. It is about understanding the problem before reaching for a solution. And that brings us to the final part of this video, because there is a bigger lesson hiding behind every one of these traditional uses. As we come to the end of this conversation, I want to leave you with a thought that goes beyond borax, beyond pests, and even beyond gardening itself. Because if you look closely, every one of these 11 uses points toward the same lesson. The real value was never the box. The real value was the knowledge. Somewhere along the way, many of us were taught that every problem requires a new purchase. An insect appears, and we buy a product. A plant struggles, and we buy another product. A weed shows up, and we buy something else. Sometimes those products are useful. Sometimes they are necessary. But previous generations often approached problems differently. Their first question was not, "What should I buy?" Their first question was, "What do I already have? And how can I use it wisely?" That mindset helped countless families build productive gardens through difficult seasons. It helped them stretch limited budgets. It helped them become more observant, more patient, and more confident in their own abilities. I think that is one reason old gardening knowledge still resonates with so many people today. Deep down, most of us want to feel capable. We want to know that we can solve problems with our own hands. We want to understand why something works instead of simply following instructions printed on a label. And perhaps most importantly, we want to feel connected to the people who came before us. Every time I hear a story about a grandparent's garden, I am reminded that gardening is not just about growing plants. It is about passing along experience. A tomato variety saved for decades, a pruning technique shared across generations, a simple household item used in ways that modern gardeners rarely discuss. These things become part of a larger story. That is why I enjoy conversations like this one. Not because borax is magical, not because old methods are always better, but because practical knowledge has value and too much of it disappears when nobody takes the time to talk about it anymore. So the next time you walk into your garage, your shed, or your kitchen, take a second look at the simple things around you. You might be surprised by how many useful tools have been hiding in plain sight all along. And if there is one lesson I hope you take from this video, it is this: successful gardeners are not always the people with the biggest budgets. More often, they are the people who pay attention, they observe, they learn, they adapt. Season after season, they build wisdom, one small lesson at a time. Now, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever used borax in your home or garden? Did your parents, grandparents, or neighbors teach you a traditional gardening trick that still works today? Let us know down in the comments. I read as many as I can, and some of my favorite ideas for future videos come directly from this community. If you found this video helpful, please take a moment to like it, share it with a fellow gardener, and subscribe to The Green Hack. We are building a community of people who appreciate practical gardening, traditional know-how, and simple solutions that stand the test of time. And speaking of simple solutions, in the next video, I am going to show you what a single cup of ordinary wood ash can do to one of the most stubborn weeds found in American lawns and gardens. Most people throw wood ash away without realizing its potential, but one particular weed absolutely hates it. We will explore why that happens and how gardeners have used this old-fashioned trick for generations. Until then, thank you for spending part of your day with me. Take care of your garden. Keep learning something new every season, and I will see you in the next video.